We are basically going to look at the situation of human rights defenders in Kenya. And we are also going to launch a report of the work that Defenders Coalition has been able to do since COVID started. With us today, we have a great team of panelists, all of whom I can comfortably say they are human rights defenders. They have been defenders in Kenya for the longest time in their lives. And today they will get an opportunity to share with us what has been happening since COVID started. With us, we have Jedida Warohio. Jedida has been a commissioner with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, and she is an advocate of the High Court. Welcome, Jedida. We also have Rachel. Okay, welcome. We also have Rachel Muycalli. Rachel is a grassroots woman human rights defender, a feminist and a community organizer based in Kibera, in Mathare, but most important, she is a gender justice activist. Karibu sana, Rachel.
Thank you, Salome. Thank you.
We have Wanjeri Nderu. Wanjeri is a human rights defender who uses social media as an advocacy tool. But important is that Wanjeri is a communication consultant, and she is with us today to share her situation since COVID. Karibu, Wanjeri.
Asante sana. Thank you for having me, Salome.
And all the way from Mombasa, we have Ishmael Bahati. Ishmael prides himself to be a defender who has been working with sexual minorities, not just in Mombasa, but in Kenya as a whole, and has also worked closely with the religious community in championing rights of sexual minorities. Karibu sana, Ishmael.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Salome, for the invite.
Karibu. We have Kamau Ngugi. Kamau is the executive director of Defenders Coalition, a defender for the longest time possible in Kenya. And on the side, Kamau is a lecturer at Daystar University, and he will be sharing with us the report today. Karibu, Kamau.
Asante sana, Salome.
We were hoping to be joined by Robert Wanjala, who is a journalist by profession. I'm told, unfortunately, he has been delayed, hoping he'll be able to join us in the course of the discussion. Robert, oh, you're already here. Karibu sana, Robert.
Thank you.
So, defenders in Kenya, defenders across the region, and defenders within the globe, that is our panel today. And I want to invite all of them to open by telling us briefly what they have been doing during this COVID period, and what work they have been doing, where do they see defenders within this period, and just share briefly on who they are. I'm going to start off by asking Ishmael to give us his opening remarks. Karibu, Ishmael.
Thank you very much, Salome. And hi, everyone. My name is Ishmael. And I must say that it has not been a very easy journey during this time of COVID-19. We have had to really work more than we have done before, even with the working at home strategy. But again, there has been a lot happening on the sexual and gender minority grounds, both locally and internationally, and also even the refugees that we have in Kenya. So this morning, I'll be glad to also speak about the LGBT refugees that are in the camp and the situation that they have been through. Thank you, that's my opening remark. And I'm looking forward to an interactive sessions.
Asante, Ishmael. Rachel, we've been seeing you online doing some fabulous work. kindly let us share with others what it is you've been up to and how the environment has treated you. Karibu, Rachel.
Hi, comrades. I hope I'm audible enough and that there's no like background noise. I'm trying so much. First, I'll say thank you so much to Defenders Coalition for organizing this webinar and the panelists. And it has not been easy, I have to be honest, in terms of the response and working so many hours. And despite majority of us also like live within the community, so you find most of the time you have to work even beyond the time you had been expecting to work. And being that also we are a movement and we live in the same community, we had to kind of shift. For now, we have been working like direct in terms of human rights, but now you move to sort of humanitarian work, but with the gender justice lens and the human rights lens, whereby we have been providing community with food supplies, whereby so far we have reached more than 5,000 households in terms of family that plus the kids, which has been also through the support of friends and well-wishers in Kenya and outside Kenya. And we have provided girls with menstrual hygiene products, those with like dignity kits, to be able to use during this time of COVID. Because if you look with the intervention of COVID, it didn't look on a humanitarian lens or on a feminist lens. And in terms of also human rights lens, for now people are going to be affected, despite we are told to stay at home and work at home, which is a privilege for most Kenyans, not for people like us who live in the informal settlements. And when you're told to stay at home, we have not been having water and washing our hands, you wonder how do you wash hands and we don't have water, which should be our rights. So it has been crazy, but through the support of my comrades at CGHRD and also like comrades around, also who have been organizing in different spaces within the grassroots community, I think we have been doing more than the government. That's what I can say as activists. We sort of like been we are the new government in charge in terms of doing what is the responsibility, which also like maybe allowed in the discussion in terms of also how like what we have been doing, we can also use it as an opportunity to mobilize the community now towards the leaders to be account. Since wametuachia kazi kama activists, wamepotea, walipigiwa kura tuwaoni. So it has not been easy, that's what I can say. And in terms of well-being and mental health issue. So maybe my certain remarks are just say like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Robert, your work with journalists has been noticed, not just because of the work Article 19 does, but also what journalists have been able to cover and inform us on what is happening during these times of COVID. We would want to hear from you shortly. What have you seen happening to journalists? And at a personal level, how has life been like since March for you? Karibu.
Thank you so much, Salome. And I'm happy to be here to share some of the experiences we've had within the context of media. And one of the interesting aspect that we've noticed since COVID cases in Kenya is that we've seen attacks, increased attacks against journalists and media workers and even bloggers, and the impunity for such crimes, it's of course constitutes one of the most enduring and depressing characteristics. Not just in Kenya, but across the region as we do our monitoring. And one of the key issue here is that while journalists and media workers are gazetted as essential service providers, we've not seen government and security agents support this group as they have been supporting other essential service providers. So for us, the concern has been that while journalists play a very critical role in terms of ensuring that the public is well informed on this health crisis, we've seen an effort that seeks to push back the efforts of journalists who want to access information, who want to, interrogate some of the measures that the government has been, putting in place. So in a nutshell, there is a challenge that we are witnessing, not just to mention about, almost over 600 journalists have been, lost their jobs within the period of 5 months. That means, the public is being denied, information. If you looked at it from, the role of journalists. At a personal level, it's been, a tough one, because one is that you need to interact with these journalists, you need to hear some of what they're going through, those who've lost their jobs, those who've been attacked, those who, being threatened by, different groupings at the county level, at, different government officials. And this has an impact on, the psychosocial, aspect of not just as a person, but also to even journalists themselves. So there's a lot of, issues that are happening. And I'm just, looking forward that, we're going to share, but also forge some, way forward on how to push back some of these elements that seeks to, deny, us accessing information as journalists.
Thank you very much, Robert. Jedida, I know you have been a commissioner, and beyond being a commissioner, I know you've been doing some good work with paralegals out there. I want to invite you to share with us what at a personal level has been happening since March, but also what you've seen happening or what you've heard with paralegals. What is their environment like? Karibu, Jedida.
Thank you very much, Salome, and thank you very much, Defenders Coalition, for hosting this discussion this morning. At a personal level, since my term of office came to an end in March 2020 at the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, I've been more home-based. I've not been, for the first time in my life, I've not been at the front line the way Rachel and the others have been speaking. I've been more on the sidelines, but it has given me a lot of time to really reflect and to just reorganize even my thoughts and my life. Of importance, personally, I've really been what those days we used to call mkenyumbani. So I've really been more the mother to my family and I just realized how much human rights work takes the individuals away from their, for a lot of their time from the family. So I've really been ministering to my children. I've also been involved in supporting, once a human rights defender, human rights practitioner, you cannot turn a blind eye to what is happening around you. And so because my last assignment at the Kenya National Commission was in respect to intersex persons. So I've had a number of them reach out to me for various things, including well, a lot of it has more been welfare, food, money, things to just make them move around, advice, counseling them just to give them the psychosocial support, because it has been very difficult for them being out there, because for the first time, unlike in the past, they are now locked in together with their relatives. And before they were usually locked in alone in exclusion of all of us. So we've all come back home and found a lot of intersex persons there. So that has been traumatizing. A lot of them have had to move from one place to the other. I've also been involved in advising individuals and institutions on the things that are evolving in the country because of the pandemic. A lot of it has been how do you organize yourself, how do you strategize and ensure that we influence the government. In respect to the paralegals, it's been the toughest time for them. Just like the way Ishmael and Rachel have said, they have really been working overtime because they are at the grassroots. They are at the point of contact. They are where the pain begins. A lot of them have had to, first of all, fight for their own survival as paralegals, because the pandemic knows no boundaries, whether you are a HRD or a paralegal or not. But more importantly is that when things are happening, when the violations are happening within the environments, people have known these paralegals to be the frontline human rights defenders. So they have called for them, but they are unable to support, especially one, because of the curfew, the hours, two, because they no longer have even the meager resources for transport, taking a mother, an expected mother to hospital, or someone who has been brutalized, or a lady who is being battered in their home. It has been very, very difficult for them, but they have still remained resilient, and they are determined to continue making a difference and participating in the work that they have continued to do in the community. The challenge they have tried to surmount is how do they work much more effectively and closely with the police, the local administration, and also the local police stations, the OCSs, because again, those are the frontline essential workers, but paralegals were not registered as essential service providers, just like HRDs. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thank you, Jedida, for that sharing. And now I come to Wanjeri. Wanjeri, your work online and offline has spoken for itself. And I know that during this COVID period, you have been active, not just posting online, but also reaching out. Kindly share with us how this has been for you at a personal level and for the defenders that you've interacted with. Karibu, Wanjeri.
Asante sana, Salome. I think beginning with it on a personal level, it's been very difficult. I have found myself in a situation where I am not earning any income. Through my consultancies, I have found myself cooped up at home with children who you have had to figure out how to, occupy their time, because we take it for granted that they wake up every day and go to school. And that is something that we've realized, and I'm sure many parents are going through it, where occupying them and you being literally a full-time mom and taking the role of parent plus teacher is also quite a challenge. I've also found myself, getting a bit, I will not use the word depressed because I don't think it got there, but getting into a space where I am feeling helpless and feeling like, there's nothing more I can do beyond what I have done. And though these feelings come to us as HRDs once in a while, it has been, more now in this period. Now, as for other HRDs, we've seen a huge increase in needs among the HRDs, especially when it comes to sustaining themselves. A lot of them have also lost their jobs. Most HRDs are volunteers. In fact, especially those in informal settlements are usually give their time because it is something that is in them. It is a passion that that they have to change their communities in whichever way they can with the little that they have. And we've seen a lot of them not being able to feed themselves, not being able to feed their families. And that brought about the initiative that I was doing of support HRD, which I was doing online and asking the public to fundraise towards supporting human rights defenders. Human rights defenders are the front line in most of these situations. Whatever is happening in the community, people will not go to the police, they'll not go to the chief, they'll first come to the HRD that they know. They'll first go to that person who they know will act quickly to bring the situation, or to improve the situation. And we have found HRDs unable to give the support that they usually give because they themselves are hungry. They themselves are unable to look at their children and tell their children, I cannot be able to feed you because of this lockdown. We've seen a lot of HRDs appealing for food, basic things for the house that we at times take for granted that we can afford. HRDs are in need now and are continuing to suffer. And it was actually worse in the first 1 month. Maybe because of the loosening of the lockdown, we are now finding some of us can be able to, go out there and do whatever we need to do to make an income. But in the first 1 month, it was very, very bad. The first 1 or 2 months. We've also realized that this pandemic has increased the number of injustices we have to deal with. And being HRDs, and we are not considered essential service providers, as Jadeda has said, is we get calls in the middle of the night, as we would even before the pandemic, but we cannot be able to respond. And at times we have responded and found ourselves talking ourselves out of curfew situations. In the first 1 month, I was stopped by the police, and they did not want to understand what I was doing in the area I was in at 11 p.m. And I told them I had to actually lie, unfortunately, to get out of that situation. I told them I'm going to hospital. I told them that I am expecting, and I have noticed that something might be wrong. And the policeman insisted, and I told him, I'll show you proof. And, you know, as HRDs, we put everything out there. And I told him, I'll even show you proof, you know, that something is wrong. But I was on my period. That's how I did not end up in curfew. They were threatening to take me to curfew at the one that was in Karen. There was one that had been set up in Karen, because that was the region I was in, and I was dealing with a domestic violence case. So we have had our challenges as HRDs, and being responders, and also the fact that we are always active about something, and now being not able to be there for people. That sense of helplessness is also affecting us even mentally, because I think HRDs charge by action. You know, we are action-oriented people. So when we are cooped up and made to feel that we cannot be able to do anything, that sense of helplessness also affects us mentally. I've also been doing some research on the mental health of human rights defenders with the support from the coalition, Salome DK Asanteni Sana. And we sent out questionnaires to human rights defenders. My focus has been women this period. We'll do men next. And we sent them questionnaires, and you can see from the questionnaires that human rights defenders out there are in big trouble themselves. And we at times feel that because the public feels or thinks that we are, you know, super strong and super women or supermen, they don't think that we also have or are sharing in the same problems that they have. So this webinar is important, and I am glad to be a part of it, because it will not only highlight some of the issues we go through, and the public will get to understand that we are also human beings like them. And even as they call us and expect us to react to them, we also are in a space where a support system is needed to keep us also sane enough and strong enough to handle their issues. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Wanjeri. Before I invite Kamau for his opening remarks, to all our participants, if you have any question, kindly use the Q&A chat box below there. Type your question and the panelists will be able to respond. My colleagues Ahmed and Diana are taking charge of noting questions that come from the participants, and we are going to share with the panelists as we continue. So if you have any question, kindly type it down on the Q&A chat box. To Kamau, for your opening remarks, and before you launch or share with us the report, I equally would wish you share with everybody how you've been doing since COVID started in March, and also what you've been engaged in during this period. So karibu Kamau.
Thank you so much, Salome, and thanks to other fellow panelists. You asked about me. I would say as an activist, and I've been in activism with all of you, I agree that it's not the easiest moment for any one of us to operate from Zoom. We are used to be out there at the forefront. It's a fight with the vibration that drives us. So I can tell you for sure that it's quite a restrictive time. But let me also say that the engine, the drive to keep fighting for the vibrations has not stopped just because we are contained within certain areas of operations. Having said that, as an organization, the Defenders Coalition, which is a national coalition for humanized defenders, we would have wished to go on leave as well or take time off, but unfortunately, the level of violations that have been taking place during COVID have unfortunately forced us to be more active than actually any other regular time. In fact, I think the last time that I felt overwhelmed was maybe around the election period, when again we normalified the spike in the level of violations. So for sure, this has been a tough time in the sense that we are physically restricted, but the extent into which violations take place then force us to use extraordinary means to reach to victims of violations and to work with our partners, our human rights defenders across the country, to offer a helping and supportive shoulder. So that has been like that. As you're aware, more human rights defenders, and I think that's what we'll be reporting on, have been faced with extraordinary circumstances as they are defending their rights. And that is exactly the reason why the title of our monitoring work that we've been doing since March around COVID, we are calling it the defending in a pandemic. So, and I think that's what I'll be providing the highlight of what it is like to defend human rights during pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamau. And I'm noting we have about 50 participants. There's already a question for Wanjeri from Lamu. They want to know whether you were intending to share the questionnaire with the women human rights defenders in Lamu. And once you respond to that, Kamau, I will request if you can share with us immediately, the report immediately after Wanjeri responds. So Wanjeri, the question from Lamu.
Yes, we first started the questionnaires within Nairobi, and we could not go countrywide at the same time. So we are done with Nairobi. Now the next phase will definitely include Lamu and other areas of the country as part of the data that we are collecting, because it's important. Different things are happening in different spaces. The challenges in Nairobi are different from what you'll experience in Lamu and other areas. So we want to capture as much data as possible to help us come up, with something that represents all of us. So yes, we are going to send questionnaires to the Lamu side also.
Okay, thank you. And Hizano, thank you for that question. And somebody in Kilifi has also appreciated. As Kamau sets up to share with us the report, to all the panelists, I would wish you listen to our findings. Part of it has already been shared briefly in your opening remarks, but listen to it because we are going to react to the report. You can choose to listen to the entire report. You can choose to listen to the section that you hold dear. So Karibu Kamau, share with us the report.
Okay, thank you so much, Salome. For sure, my work is made very easy because the choice of the panelists is based on some of the key findings of the report, which we are calling defending in a pandemic. And among the findings, of course, has something to do with the impact that we've identified with respect to humanitarian needs at the community level, and where human rights defenders have to respond and themselves the challenges that they are faced with. It's also about being an active human rights defender and the challenges someone faces when they're operating online and offline. It's also about the challenge of being a media practitioner as a human rights defender. And those are some of the things that have come up. And it's also about the challenges that come about being a human rights defender who is defending rights of persons that are discriminated. And others, of course, groups in the society that are considered minorities. So for sure, the panel helps us to basically highlight those are some of the concerns. But more specifically, we started monitoring violations just at the onset of the first case of Kenyan with a virus when it was reported, and that was in March. And the need to monitor was informed by the immediate reaction by the state when it started off measures that some of them which were recommended by the World Health Organizations and the Ministry of Health on the need to contain the virus. Among them was, of course, restriction of movement. It was also about hygiene, someone wearing masks, washing hands, and all that. And that informed, of course, the state reaction. And I must admit that, of course, the virus is something different for all of us. And I think there were too many experimentation of strategies that were used. But what really provoked us to get to the ground is the extraordinary level of violence that was imposed during the implementation of the restrictions that were imposed by the government. And these were enforced by the police. And I think the first reaction and concern was that the level of injuries and beatings that most people had to face the moment there was the declaration of a curfew. And the next thing that we were also concerned with is that the communities were expected to start certain practices, particularly washing their hands, wearing face masks. But we also are wondering what is the practicality of it, and what was the government doing to offer support, particularly to the vulnerable groups and the persons living in poverty. And you find that on the ground, Humanized defenders started raising concerns about access to food and access to water. And that is where they started finding certain challenges. And the next motivation was that we increasingly noted that Humanized defenders who are not to be at the forefront, they were being restricted in terms of how they operate, particularly when it comes to using the right that and the freedoms to protest, to demonstrate, to share information publicly getting to be much more restricted, and even to question or to hold the government to account, including even when they're spending resources. And when we've started finding that there are those kind of restrictions, that is when we decided to ask our partners on the ground, our Humanized Defenders Network, to start recording some of those cases. Remember, the restrictions was affecting us as an organization and also Humanized defenders because they couldn't physically travel in some of the areas, particularly those who were in Nairobi, in Mombasa, Mandera, could not move to certain countries. And because of those restrictions, we had to be creative enough to actually work, to share tools online and to work with Humanized defenders on the ground. So what I'm sharing is, I'm sure some of them have already been shared, and is that there are several observations that we clearly noted, generally and specifically to Humanized defenders. Generally, what we have observed, of course, is that the gendered nature of violence, with particularly the violence at home, and even within communities, focusing more on women, women having to bear a lot of injuries and deaths that have come about, both because of physical attacks, but even access to basic health facilities, particularly on maternal health. We also documented a lot of police violence, and this violence, of course, affected generally the communities, but it became even much more tough when anyone questioned the manner in which violations were taking place, and therefore Humanized defenders being the first persons to bear the toughest of those experiences. The sexual and gender-based violence, particularly targeting young girls, the moment after the schools were closed, I think have increased, and I think that has also been observed generally. And we also, in our report, identified serious concerns around Humanized defenders that defend the rights of indigenous groups. More so those groups that are still living within contested areas in forests, and despite their right to be where they are. And I'm talking about communities like the Senguel and the and the Ogieks particularly, who have had to be displaced. They have also noted the displacements of individuals within the Nairobi and other areas. And the challenge specifically is that this is at a time when the violence, the level of violence, but at the same time, when it was taking place, displacing people during COVID and the impact that has had on the communities. At the same time, generally, we noted that the lack of access to food and other livelihood after, as you all know, the rate at which most people have lost their livelihoods because of jobs and other businesses that have closed, and they're also sources of livelihood. So generally those are the observed things, but more specific to human rights defenders, I think what has been of serious concern is the level of restriction, particularly on the documentation of human rights, or even responding to violations when they take place. And that restriction is not just that you're restricted from conducting your work, but it's also coupled with targeted violence against human rights defenders. During this period, we documented the arrests and serious injuries around the period of arrest of more than 15 human rights defenders when they were conducting their work. I would say, for example, there was what we call the Kayore 9 that were arrested just because they went to protest the lack of water in their neighborhood. We've had other human rights defenders that have been arrested just because they were they were questioning in Naivasha how the lake corridors have been taken away by private investors. And for that reason, they were quickly arrested and taken to court. What we have also noted is that following the arrest, there has been deliberate effort to conceal not to take the human rights defenders to court. So it's more of persecution rather than with the intention of prosecution. So most of the cases, the human rights defenders who would be arrested, they will be forced to report severally to police stations, but they will never be taken to court. I think that has been a very, very serious concern. I also need to mention that we have also had cases of human rights defenders that have been, following the arrest, they have been taken into quarantine facilities. And the bigger concern is that you're taken to a quarantine facility not because of a medical related concern or restriction, but as a form of persecution for human rights defenders. And we've had several cases whereby human rights defenders and journalists have had to endure the indignity of being placed in facilities that themselves were not up to standard. And the reason for the containment was purely for persecution purposes. At the same time, let me also address the fact that human rights defenders are also not immune to the virus, and we've had instances, at least one or two cases that we know of human rights defenders who have themselves been victims, but they have raised concern about the level of stigma that they themselves have to face. So you can imagine, as a person who is at the forefront and people are scared or not willing to work with you. The other concerns that we've had in operating during this COVID period, we have identified that the wellness component and the psychosocial need of human rights defenders has increased because they have to deal and document a lot of serious violations and injuries, and some of the injuries have actually occasioned by sexual-based violence. Again, have had serious impact on the people that document, but above all, the level of lacking in resources and affecting the humanitarian needs of the communities, and the community themselves expecting support from human rights defenders who themselves do not have the resources even to take care of themselves. And this has forced human rights defenders themselves to be at that crossroad. And because above all, even when communities can somehow access some resources when they are availed by humanitarian groups, you find that there is a push back when human rights defenders go to access the same support because they are assumed, first of all, not to be lacking, or in certain instances where provincial administration is concerned, they do not provide for people that are considered that are not considered well. I think the other concern and restriction that has been taking place has everything to do with protests and the right to that is guaranteed by our constitution to assemble peacefully. And indeed that has been the source of the main violation that human rights defenders have been faced with. And I think we have seen it at different levels. You're all familiar with it more recently when we were commemorating Sabasaba, which is about 30 years of since first Sabasaba, and you find the level of arrest that took place and the coordination that took place to make sure that human rights defenders were arrested. And in total, over 60 human rights defenders were arrested. And some of them had not even started the protest. That shows the level at which the government do not want people to raise certain concerns. I think we really need to defend these rights. We've seen that in other cases, we've also seen that we have to be extremely careful that the right to privacy is increasingly being the new attack in which different methods are being used. We have had a case, for example, for one of the popular bloggers whose home was broken into to arrest him. And he was taken to a point of detention and held in Muycalli, and we were forced to move from police stations to the next during curfew at night until we were able to trace him very late at night. But what was amazing is the attempt by the DCI officers to shop around for a magistrate who would be willing to detain them for a longer period, despite the office of the DPP refusing to charge. So I think these are some of the critical concerns that we are going to be faced with moving forward, and we need to be alive to that. I had mentioned that as we continue working among ourselves and even within the human rights defenders movement, we have recognized as well that people working on rights that are not considered popular within the communities, within the society, particularly the sexual orientation, sexual and gender-based kind of rights, I think we have seen that a high level of restriction and pushback against those kind of defenders. And we had to intervene where citizens have kicked out some of those defenders from their own homes, from their own rented premises. And I think that makes it very difficult for human rights defenders to operate. But on a positive note, I want to take this opportunity to highlight just a few things that have really lifted my spirit during this period. And the first one I would say is the level of resilience of human rights defenders that have refused to be cowed down despite the extreme violence that they have faced. I've seen human rights defenders refusing to back off when they are faced with threats and violence. They have continued to stand with victims of injustices. They have continued to hold the government to account, which is quite positive. In other words, human rights work have not stopped because of the violence and persecution that has targeted human rights defenders. I've also been proud of the human rights defenders that have gone out of their way, despite their own difficult circumstances, to appeal for resources to support their communities. I found it quite interesting that they have refused to think about themselves first, but they have, for every humanitarian support they have decided to share it with their communities and the colleagues in the human rights defenders movement. And I think that's something that really, moving forward, we hope that we can build on and appreciate and applaud this kind of work. I've seen human rights defenders take the role of the Ministry of Health, whereby when the Ministry of Health has taken a little bit of a professional outlook, talking of PPEs and that probably is too difficult. The human rights defenders have become now the connectors, passing the message about COVID in the language that community understands. We have seen several graffitis and murals that connect with the communities, and this is the work that human rights defenders have done. I've seen human rights defenders being creative when they lack the resources, with little support, they have been able to come up with methods of developing soaps and other detergents that help them to clean their hands. And I've also seen human rights defenders supporting community initiatives that are promoting people to wear masks. So they are putting some little resources to the tailors at the local communities. And what has turned out is that we have more communities actually respecting the guidelines that have been provided by the Ministry of Health without having to wait to be supported by the government or any other persons. And indeed, we have certain recommendations that we can share. And more specifically, we've been appealing and we keep appealing to all agencies, but more specifically to the government, to use what we call human rights-based approach in exercising, in dealing with issues of COVID. You cannot kill and expect that people will appreciate that you're killing because you're trying to save them from death. I think the simple message is that the government must be gentle. They must not employ the kind of punitive measures that particularly the police are using during this period to force people to obey certain guidelines. We're really pushing for the recognition of the gendered nature of the violence and the challenges that human peoples are facing around this period. And therefore, we really, for example, recommending that the gender desks at the police stations be there for people to feel confident to be able to report cases of particularly of sexual gender-based violence. I mean, there has been unprecedented attack and violence against citizens and human rights defenders. And we cannot talk about police reform without seeing an extra level of police being held to account. And not just the individuals that conduct the violations at the police stations, but also the command responsibility. Central Police Station, for example, in Nairobi has become that station where the commander seems to encourage violations and violence against citizens and violence against human rights defenders. Such commanders of that police station, they need to be held to account because we have seen recently that the same person that are responsible and directing when a member of the county assembly, a woman, being attacked when she's not armed and the level of violence that was meted on her. The other recommendation has to do with the respect for the freedom of assembly and the freedom of the media. The media has done great to communicate and to provide information about the virus. And by restricting and attacking journalists, I mean, it does not help. It just certainly brings people to feel that there's a lot that is being hidden. And I think it's with a better, more vibrant media that will keep the society much more informed and be able to question excesses. And I think and then the right for the freedom of expression, the freedom of assembly, it's a very critical, these are critical rights that are enshrined in our constitution and even in international law. And we cannot suspend it at any time, even during a pandemic period. And I think what we have seen increasingly is taking away and reducing and trying to water down that right. And the biggest fear we have is that this extraordinary level of policing of the society may not go away, even if the COVID virus may go away. So we need to be extremely careful with that. And therefore, for me and for all of us, is in conclusion, is to appeal to the human rights defenders community to keep to remain resilient and to keep working hard. As a defenders coalition, we've been responding on a regular and a daily basis on human rights defenders whenever they are at risk. We'll continue to do it, but we feel that the solidarity that human rights defenders have shown when each other are at risk, I think we have to sustain that. And moving forward, we have to ensure that the country is guided by the rule of law, respect for human rights and democracy. Thank you very much.
Asante sana Kamau, and thank you for sharing. I'm hoping that all the panelists were able to capture issues because now we get into this session where we will be interrogating the report. And to start off, we had a participant, Peter, who was indicating that we need to approach issues of violence from a gendered perspective, so that we don't just see violence from a women's perspective. And therefore, Rachel, I want to invite you to respond to both the report, some of the issues you've had about women human rights defenders, but also respond to Peter in regard to what is happening to young men during this period. Karibu, Rachel.
Thank you, Salome, and thank you, DK, for the report, and Peter, for your question. And I just want to first respond to Peter. First, my politics when it comes to gender, it's about gender justice. That's why I don't like sort of confine like being a man or a woman, but look in terms of being also an LGBTQ person, and the politics of also identity and everything. And to my point of view, also as a feminist, sometimes I find it to be very problematic. When also we try also to fight as women human rights defenders in our existence with the kind of violence that we go through. Also like also male colleagues. Yes, I'll not say they're not going through a lot of violation or vulnerability, but when you see when it comes to a woman or LGBTQ person, it's usually double than what our male colleagues go through. And then if you look in terms of power and privilege that exists within the space, even the space that we exist, even as me, Muycalli, as a person, you find I have to fight on daily basis to exist. I have to fight for patriarchal system to exist. So for me, it's about also us as defenders, whether it's a man, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's a woman, when there's that violation of a gender perspective, let us speak out. Let's acknowledge it as a happen. And also like for us to coexist on that, also need to call out the toxic masculinity, whereby also our male comrades need also to start calling out even male who are toxic, even within the space, not only within the other space that we live within the community, but also within even our own space where we exist as women human rights defenders and as activists. I find if you don't unpack that, it becomes a bit problematic. And I hear the comrades and I hear the concern, and it's our collective struggle that we need to push, and we need to fight. And I hear in terms of also like looking in terms of the existing structure, and this one now I have to also go back within the report. The fact we exist as activists, one thing we are blacklisted within the government stimulus package, that's automatic. Yes, and I don't want to use the word resilience as much as we have been resilient, but sometimes I feel it works against us. Because we are like, we have to exist in this environment does not accommodate us. So you find even a lot of us, like the way Wanjeri said, and many of us have been going through, you have to get now through a lot of anxiety. Because hakuna kitu aibu unaandikia watu list ya kupata msaada na umelala njaa. Ama you're giving food and you're sleeping hungry. Because your name cannot appear in the list, but and also at the same point, and this is also like I've had fight with a lot of people, some of that have been coming to support in Mathare. Because even me, I'm vulnerable. The fact I exist or I'm privileged, not like many women in Mathare, but I'm also vulnerable. I'm vulnerable existing as a woman and an HRD, and also like existing within the community here in Mathare. So you find when we are trying to look in terms of resilience, also we need to look on how it works. Also like in HRD, whereby also we don't stress. The stress doesn't being put in all of us, whereby also the government does not also like sort of run away from its responsibility and throw it to the activists. And I want also maybe to encourage most of the activists to look on the article of Dr. William Tunga. He wrote recently on the reflection on the Sabasaba at 30 about the struggle for progressive alternative political leadership in Kenya, but also within our own confined space, because I really like the way it was very like reflecting on the themes DK has spoken about. Like also trying to see also the gap between the mainstream and the grassroots. Because reality with this whole period, there's been that gap of some of the organization not also looking in terms of now sort of put the power within, like putting not the power because we have the power, but also adding value to the work defenders are doing on the ground, and also seeing about the well-being. The well-being meaning in terms of we are working day in, day out. Like the way Wanjeri said, and also like most of you comrades, our activism is not like a paid activism. But people expect if someone gets raped in the community, you have to pay for transport. If someone gets abused in the community, you have to sort of run, you become the lawyer and everything at the same time, which I'm not a lawyer. If someone lacks food, like which also takes away our privacy of spaces. Like you find you at your place at 6, someone is knocking. Sometimes the way I've had most of your experience, you have to sort of lie in terms of beating the curfew hours because things have to be work. Human rights work does not stop because there's COVID. But also I wanted to also like have the idea of looking on how COVID, as much as it's there as COVID, but on how it has affected our rights. And if you're not careful, the gains we have had as a movement might be taken away. The gains we have had as women movement in relation to the Beijing Plus 25 platform might be taken away. Our rights to association, our rights to demonstrate, because our rights, we have to uphold it and we have to resist any form that comes taking our Article 7 constitution on picketing. But also like look in terms of sexual reproductive health and rights, access to contraceptive, access to maternal health, and now, which also comes back to the issue you're talking about, the rising cases of teenage pregnancy. Now we can talk about teenage pregnancy, but are we looking on the level of high cases of HIV/AIDS and safe abortion? As much as people will say, don't want to touch it, I'm pro-abortion as a person, pro-safe abortion. But looking in terms of now, we might end up losing a lot of our women and our girls because of unsafe abortion. And looking in terms of how also like even accessing as a woman human rights defender hospital, now it has become very problematic. So we need to kind of unlock it and see on how it sort of look and to our level of organizing, but also looking in terms, like I'll not go with the thing of, as a person I'm thinking of, we need to defund the police. No fact, like we need to defund, not the whole thing about reform. I know most even specialists, they're like reform, but our police are not reforming. We can see like what happened to our MCA in Mathare, Mudeu. It's not like a unique case. This happens to women, which shouldn't happen to women. It happens to majority of us. It happened to Julie Wanjera from Mathare Social Justice when the police were trying to attack her. It has happened to Beatrice Karore like some years back. It has happened also like to a lot of companies. Even it happened to Ruth Mombi when she was going to somewhere in around what is it called, these markets close to Buruburu. But you see also like in camp, when I also like this one, now I'm talking as an activist and also like about my agency. Also, we need to be clear also in terms of class politics and inequality within the whole space and within the community level. So when it happens to activists, also are we there to protect the activists and women human rights defender? Because also like if I'm expecting to protect another woman, also I'm expected the same thing also when I'm at risk someone to come to my support and aid as a woman. So I think it's important when we try to look at all this issue, we don't also like forget, we are defending community, but who is also like on our aids. If something happens to you, Salome, we will come to support you. Will the whole public also now say we are standing with Salome or anything? Or if anything happens to you, Jedida, like how is the public and even the movement sort of support Jedida? So I think to my point of reflection during this process, let us also protect our own people as the human rights activist community. Let's check on each other. The way I say, like this thing has been like very traumatizing even for me as a person. So that also like I have to acknowledge I have like really good support system of friends that have really come through in the public. But I'm also like looking in terms of now, like I said, we have all done this important work, but how do we differentiate in terms of philanthropic work, like work not taking away people power? Because also that's where I'm also like unpacking. We'll be doing this humanitarian work, but it's not sustainable. But how also do we organize our community to hold the leaders accountable? Because it's not the work of defenders to do the work of the government. But yes, we are doing it because we exist, we have humanity, we have gone through this thing, but also like how do you use the things and the work you've been doing? Also even the same government to know like defenders exist, because we have tried to hide a lot of their shame at this period. But at the same time, let's organize the masses to sort of call them out. But also at the same time, like see our different like like organized in terms of intersectionality. Like I'm happy to see someone representing also like a queer community. Like seeing also like how do you bring like a strong allyship and solidarity within ourselves to center our issues, but also I'm hoping maybe, I don't know if I'll get time, seeing on also like how we can have that stimulus package also for defenders, so that I'm sure if niki blacklistio kwa chief, huku niko safe. Thank you.
Asante sana, Muycalli. Muycalli has raised a lot of issues. The one I want to highlight is clearly the dilemma that a defender finds himself or herself operating in. Do I support others and leave myself who is in need? The woman defender, do I champion rights of women only, or do I champion rights of both young men and women? Do we advocate for defunding of police, and what does that mean within our community? Beyond that, issues of safeguarding the gains made, organizing, the need to organize by women defenders, and of course, castigating some of the actions that have happened through police to women human rights defenders. Just looking at our time, I would request as panelists, we keep time, we share briefly, but I also know there are questions that have been directed to us. For example, what is the role of the coalition when a center is attacked? That question will be responded by Kamau. Wanjeri is encouraging all of us as participants to ensure that our conversation goes online, hashtag defending in a pandemic. So if you're out there as a participant, pick up the conversation and make sure it trends. And to move to Ishmael, to just loop in part of what Muycalli has said. And for you, I want to hear, how are the SOGI activists and SOGI community members faring on during this time? How is their well-being, especially by virtue of being forced to stay at home with other family members? But also in your sharing with us, tell us in terms of numbers, how many community members have been thrown out of their houses because of their sexuality or their inability to pay for rent, among other challenges they have been facing. Ishmael, karibu.
Thank you very much, Salome. And I must say, Muycalli, thank you very much for your response on the question that Peter asked. For start off, may I allow me to start there, Salome, with a question that Peter had asked, Peter Ngure. Yeah, so one thing I must say that as men, I think the society did not bring us up to be able to speak out on violence against ourselves. And last week, I was listening to Caroline Mtoko speak to men specifically about not speaking out. We are sick. We don't want to say we are sick. We are sleeping hungry. We don't want to say that we are hungry. And I can say this, for example, in the organization that I lead, I have 222 members, and out of the 222 members, I have 67 people who identify as women. And trust me, most of the calls that I've received were actually from people who identify as women. Where are the men? Are they not really facing this situation, or they're just being tailored by the society so that they can keep quiet regardless of the situation that they are going through? So I think it's high time we call men to speak out on situations whereby they feel that they have been violated. Even partner violation, we are afraid to speak about them, but it's happening. It's not like it's not happening. If you speak to people individually, you'll find out that there's a lot happening, and you ask them, why are you not reporting this? Why are you not speaking about this? They are ashamed to speak about this. So myself is to encourage the men to speak out, not only the LGBT community, but generally men, we should speak out about violence that is happening to us. Because with this, we hear women speak a lot about sexual and gender-based violence against women, because these are cases that are being spoken about. There's nothing that is being said about men, because we men are not speaking out, and I encourage us to speak out. So now back to the issue of how the situation has been for the LGBT community, sexual and gender minority community. I must say, as I started before, that it has not been easy for us. We have tried to mobilize resources to support ourselves, because we know definitely we are not going to get anything from the government, in spite of the fact that there's little that is being offered on the ground. The little that is being offered on the ground is at the chief's offices, and the LGBT and the chief are not in very good relationship. You can be sure we will not get that. So we have tried our level best. It has not been enough, but we have really tried our level best. On the issue of, for the coastal, may I allow me to speak for the coastal region, because that is where I'm very conversant with. And I know most of the, out of the 14 organizations that we have in Mombasa, at least 10 of them have received some support, some sort of support to support the members directly. Pema Kenya for itself, for herself, has been able to stand with the members for the last 3 months, offering money, cash money, because we knew other organizations had chipped in with foodstuff and other commodities, masks and sanitary pads and sanitizers. But Pema Kenya was chipped in with money for every month, providing until next month will be our last month from the projection that we had. It has not been very easy for sexual and gender minorities at the camp. For those who know, the camp has already had attacks on LGBT persons, and most of them have been injured. If you've been following the refugee issues, we have had almost a case every week, you know, like attacks and physical harm to the LGBT refugees. And I think it's high time we start thinking about having all the LGBT refugees as urban refugees, to minimize the level of attacks on LGBT refugees. Yes, in terms of, we have received, Pema Kenya has received 42 cases of violence that has been reported. And this is just for the last 2 months. This month we have not yet compiled our report. So 42 for the last 2 months, and this is the highest that we have ever received, because a lot is happening. And I know also the frustration that comes with the confinement, the isolation, has not made things better. People are looking for places to vent their frustrations. And in most cases, and unfortunately, in most cases, this is directed to the vulnerable or the minorities, and especially the LGBT persons. So things have not been very easy for us. We have also, in collaboration with the Defenders Coalition, we have been able to relocate 3 humanized defenders, 2 in Malindi and 1 in Mombasa. And I think this is the best we could do, because there has been an overwhelming call for support, but we cannot do it. And sometimes it's also limiting, especially when the people that are involved are not in the definition of human rights defenders, where the defenders can come in, or other organizations that are supporting defenders can come in. So that's also a gap that I've been speaking about, and I think with time we will be looking into that. And I'm hoping that maybe as we look forward, there will come an organization that will stand for vulnerable people that are not necessarily defenders. I know we already have GALC as a coalition, but it has also their own limits. But I'm hoping that that will change. We have had a situation whereby our Nyeri office belonging to Hoimas was attacked online with cyberbullying, a lot of comment with a prominent person from Nyeri. And I think from the last conversation I had with the director of Hoimas, they felt that they have been left alone. They did not feel that us as the defenders, human rights defenders, have come to that. And this is something that I've always spoken about to my fellow defenders, that when it comes to the issue of LGBT issues, can we also come together, just like we come together on things that are women? We have been on the roads, we have been marching with women to speak against violence on women. We have stood with the lawyers, you know, we have stood with sex workers, female sex workers. But when it comes to issues with sexual and gender minorities, we don't see you. Are you choosing at times who to defend during your defending? Or is it just something that you don't want, or your faith does not allow you to do this? So I think I encourage defenders to join me, to join us, the LGBT community, to speak against violence. You start by our local LGBTs and also speak for the refugees LGBTs who, because they are also in Kenya and they belong to this community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ishmael, for that challenge. I think challenge accepted on my behalf and on behalf of other defenders that we work with. I believe that is a question that had also been raised by John of Humanized and Mauricio in Kisumu in regard to attacks to the officers in Nyeri and Kisumu. And this is something that I will also be asking Kamau in your response. As you prepare to respond, you raise or share what you think we needs to be done. To Pema, thank you for the stimulus package to community members. I want to request Jedida to come in. And Jedida, for you, the reason why I want you to jump in is because of the concern that Ishmael has raised in terms of support. Where do we see partners, the role of civil society organizations and partners in standing with defenders, despite the defense work that they do? But as you also respond to that, we all listened to the speech by the president most recently. And in his words, I would wish you share briefly on what you see this portending to human rights defenders. When he spoke, he said what we need to do, what we don't need to do in terms of reiterating the directives. Where do you see this taking the defenders as they defend human rights? So Jedida, karibu.
Thank you very much, Salome, for this session and also for those two questions. First, let me say that 2 days before our first COVID case was announced, the Director General of the World Health Organization made a very important statement. And he said that all countries must strike a fine balance, and this is the quotation, between protecting health, minimizing economic and social disruption, and respecting human rights. That tells me from the onset, from the word go, it was very clear that this pandemic had was going to have a major impact on issues of human rights and also its related connection with the socio-economic aspects. Of course, when you look at the figures of the pandemic, since the opening up, the lockdown was over, we have escalated the figures. It therefore tells me that there is something that we are not doing correctly. You mentioned the president's speech. From the time the president began speaking to us, he kept on saying that these are not normal times. He's used words like we are all God's children. He used words like we must hold each other accountable. And he said, and especially in his last speech, he said that we must continue to tell our story. And therefore, what is our story as human rights defenders? We must tell that story. And that is why we are having a challenge when it comes to our own socio-economic issues, because the story of the human rights defenders, as human rights defenders, is not being told. We have heard the story of Master Yasin Moyo, the young man who lost his life just because he was standing at their balcony. We've had the very sad case of baby Shamsudi, who was only 2 months old and was welcomed into this country by inhaling tear gas in her own home. We saw the serious brutality of Mercy Cherono in Nakuru, who was dragged by the police on a motorbike. It tells me the issue of policing, the issue of police brutality continues to be a problem. I want us to focus on the first case that the court decided when that was brought by the Law Society of Kenya. That case is very important and instructive in terms of telling us that we have a challenge as we continue to manage this pandemic. And this is what Justice Korir said. He said that it appears that in confronting the coronavirus, which by all means is a faceless enemy, the police have brought the law and order mentality to the fore. Diseases are not contained by visiting violence on members of the public, and one cannot suppress or contain a virus by beating people. Therefore, the National Police Service must be held responsible and accountable for violating the rights to life and dignity, among other rights. It tells me that even the courts, the government, the courts are very clear that our propensity to violate each other is very, very, very high. And that case is very telling because when the LSK went to court, many people did not understand. It was really at the height of the first few weeks in March. And people did not understand what was going on. People were very scared and the like. If you now link that with the last comments of the president just this week, actually it scares me because it tells me that things are going to get worse, because one of the things that the president said is that there's going to be individual accountability for police officers. He also said that there has to be strict compliance on all the orders, irrespective of the Mheshimiwa syndrome. And he also gave the IG very interesting powers, that the IG has powers to withdraw licenses, and this withdrawal is permanent if you violate. And it doesn't matter who you are, regardless of your social status or rank, you'll be held accountable if you violate this. You see, those statements are very, very profound. And in the same breath, when he was saying this, and I know he said this because of what we had seen Sakaja take us through, and the positive discrimination he had been given by the police, it tells me that today, as human rights defenders, as they continue to do their work, it's going to become much more difficult, much more difficult. It then brings me to the issue about the defenders and the partnership. It tells me then it is very, very important for human rights defenders to work with certain key institutions in government too. For example, human rights defenders cannot work in isolation of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, of the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. They must of necessity anchor their work with those two institutions because of the nature of their work. What those two institutions do is exactly what human rights defenders do. Thirdly, human rights defenders and civil society must partner with humanitarian organizations, because the impact on the human rights violation, the first recourse that people want is medical care, food, water, and that is not what human rights defenders usually offer. So we must partner with humanitarian organizations. However, I think there's a silver lining in all this, and as I end, yesterday, I think it was yesterday, no, the day before yesterday, I think, yeah. No, it was yesterday or the day before yesterday. There's a lot that is happening in this country. The CS Matiang'i made a very profound statement. Unfortunately, he made this statement because of the beating of the MCA, Patricia Mutheu. We don't have to speak just because the creme de la creme have been violated. We must also speak when they are the most vulnerable of us are violated. But I think he said very interesting things in a very bold way. And I think we need to take these words and then hold him to account and begin working together. There's a working group that was created to link the civil society and the Ministry of Interior, because one of the things we are lacking is the whole issue of public participation and engagement with all these COVID-related protocols, the committees, and the ministries. And if you listen to him, he was very frustrated. He actually spoke for the first time like a Kenyan without a portfolio, but spoke the truth of what any human rights defenders were saying. And he said, and let me quote this because I think it's important to recall these words and then use them to work with him and ensure that we hold the police to account. And he said, I want to ask our police officers across the country, and I'm quoting, let us do our work. It can be painful and sometimes frustrating. That's in respect to the police. But let us live within the standing orders. We must bring the standing orders very deliberately, because what we are lacking is the law is very clear, the standing orders are very clear, but the implementation of the law continues to be a major issue in this country. He says it is very painful to see a member of the public, regardless of their status, being beaten by a police officer in uniform. It is something we should not have in society. We are better than this. I will not shirk or hide from responsibility. That is Matiang'i saying. We have to be sincere. And being sincere is that means we have now an opportunity to raise our voices as human rights defenders, very specifically with data and with statistics. He says it is not right and it is not fair that we subject members of the public or people we are supposed to lead to that kind of treatment. We are not a society where we should beat each other. We must find lawful ways of dealing with our challenges, and the law provides sufficient opportunities. Let us do the right thing for the country. We will respect and obey all court orders. And things is very important, especially in light of the evictions that have been happening. It is very important for us to engage directly the CS of Health, the CS Interior, and work together with the Constitutional Commission and independent offices. Because if you read, and this report is very good because it really complements what the Kenya National Commission report on pain and pandemic said. And one of the recommendations that there was that this was a direct recommendation to the IG that we must ensure that members of the National Police Service do not exploit the COVID-19 pandemic to criminalize or to obstruct the work of civil society and human rights defenders. For me, that is a good place for us to start and engage and amplify the voices of human rights defenders across the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jedida, and for your parting short words for defenders. Defenders out there, Jedida has told us three things. We need to know the law and work within the law. Number two, we need to hold people accountable based on their commitments. And number three, partnerships are important, and we can't afford to do our work as defenders without engaging other partners within the humanitarian, within the government, and outside of government. So those who are listening, kindly take those three words with you. I want to invite Robert, and Robert, for you, is to tell us what is the role of journalists in ensuring that during this COVID period, we get impartial information as we try to remain safe and secure. And also want to remind you that we are running short of time, so let's try and keep our sharing as short as possible. Karibu, Robert.
Thank you so much, Salome, and the panelists. I mean, I just want to appreciate Ngugi for the report, but also just highlight some of the key issues that perhaps he has mentioned in the report, but also as a way forward, perhaps in my contribution to this conversation. So I will add to what Ngugi mentioned. I'll add in statistics just to make it look a bit, serious. One is that we continue to do monitoring of journalists, attacks, and other human rights defenders like bloggers who uses internet to highlight some of the issues that happens in the country. And one of the a concern for us is that while we've monitored and documented some of these cases, we've not seen much of effective investigations, especially around threats and even attacks on journalists by the entities that are supposed to do this work, who are the police. The concern is that most of these cases are also not done by police themselves. So it becomes so hard in terms of trying to do, to force any sort of work on.
I think we have lost Wanjara.
I think I lost the signal, but I'm back. Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, sure, thanks. I want to just say, over the period of this pandemic, I was able to document, monitor and document 40 cases. Controlling and just basics like
I think we are having issues with Robert's internet. As we wait for him to sort the issue out, can I request that Wanjeri, for you, okay, Robert.
Having a small challenge where my internet keeps on, fluctuating. Yeah, so I'll just be brief that, we've had documentation of cases that, seems to be a concern for us. That while, there is evidence of attacks, we've not seen much in terms of investigations from police. And one of the concerns for us is that this, situation makes it even, worse because people who attack journalists and they know that nothing will happen to them, it seems to embolden them and makes them think, they can continue, attacking people who are essentially, providing information to the public around this COVID. The other issue that we wanted to mention is that while we continue to do this, one of the areas that we need to focus is that we've seen state officers using, state machineries to harass people. A case in point is there are 2 bloggers who were arrested in Eldoret last week. And within 6 hours, they were already in Nairobi because they had posted some stuff on social media about one of the CS who was allegedly to be sick. And of course, to be sick is not the issue, but the use of, state machinery to harass journalists is one of the concerns for all of us. That there are state officers who think they are above the law, that whenever they feel aggrieved by any individuals in society, they employ, the state machinery to go after those that, are only expressing themselves online. So we have, had these cases, and we've written a letter to the IG, wanting to know where we are in terms of investigation of these cases. And I'm very disappointed that, nothing has happened. While we've had, pronouncements that, they are investigating, but in real sense, there is nothing that, we have no evidence that shows that these cases have been, investigated. The use of, law, some of the regulations that were, put in place to address the spread of pandemic is one of the problematic provisions that we've seen, being used by the state to harass, journalists and, bloggers and human rights defenders. Specific law that is being used, or rather abused, is the Cyber Crime Act, which, you post something on social media or journalists are out there doing work, the government comes for you because in the government definition is that you've posted something that does not, meet what the government consider as, factual. And that is one of the problems that perhaps we need to also to look at it. In terms of, I mentioned at the beginning about, journalists who've been, sacked from various media houses. We have a record of over 500 cases. This is very, concerning because the impact of this is that the media houses personnel are being, stretched, thinly, and then that will be impacted in terms of the quality, but also the quantity of the news that is churned out in the media because of this, shortage of, personnel within the media houses. So for us, I think it's also a concern for us. But also, if you look at it from the economic side, it's a safety issue. We note that, we need to come up with a way of how do we then, have a conversation that will address some of these issues. And for us at COVID-19, while we've seen, massive, layoff from media houses, we've not seen stories about, these issues. Journalists have, perhaps, walked away and said, it's done. We find something else to do. But the spiral effect of that in terms of psychosocial, issues that we've seen, we've actually documented 3 cases of journalists. One who committed suicide, then 2 others have actually threatened, they were in a dire situation of, committing suicide, which is a very serious concern that we needed to also highlight. The last part that I wanted to share is, so moving forward, one of the things that COVID-19 is actually looking to do is, now that we've not seen investigations in terms of those who attacked journalists and human rights defenders, perhaps as a coalition, as partners, we need to come up with a way that seeks to expose some of these officers who are involved in these issues. We had a project in Uganda where we said name and shame, where journalists who are when a police officer attacks an individual, they note that police officer, they find the details of that police officer, and then we have a campaign online of just calling out that specific officer, shaming them, and just making them feel that they are identified, and that if the state is not willing to take action against them, the civil society will take action on social media and just push these names out there so that people and the public knows that these are the very elements that are not supposed to be in our police service. So the question about what we are doing is that we continue to do monitoring, and monitoring itself is not an end, because what happens with these statistics? So we want to come up with a way that we use these statistics to confront the government to act. And one way is perhaps writing to the IG and asking him hard questions around these issues. And one of the problems that we've had is that in most of our documentation, journalists are not sometimes willing to go and report these cases to the police for simple, assumptions that nothing will happen. So we are trying to encourage journalists that, we need to start, working together and push these officials or officers who are rocky to, to be accountable. We need to have these cases, addressed as soon as it happens, because the challenge is when we keep quiet, the officers think it's okay, it's normal, they can continue doing that. So that would be my contribution to this discussion. But I also looked at the recommendation, and I think one of the recommendations on the risk report is that we need investigations, not just pronouncements, but we need investigation to some of these cases. And so we need to have evidence that while this report was reported, this case was reported at this station, this is what happened. We need a written evidence. We need to see people in court. We don't want just to hear people saying they have been interdicted, but we can't really know where they went. We followed a case of a police officer who was actually redeployed. He was taken to another station, but on the record, the police says he was relieved of his duty because of the misconduct, but actually they send him somewhere else. So we need to actually document some of these officers, get their names, get their numbers, then have them shamed in public if they can't be prosecuted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. And for the last statement that you made, I'm sure all the defenders who are listening to this conversation, you need to take that point seriously. We need evidence. And once we get the evidence as partners, let's seek justice for those who have been violated. I want to assure everyone who is waiting for the report that this report will be available on the Defenders Coalition website, that is www.defenderscoalition.org. So as soon as we are done with this webinar, you can access the report online. Wanjeri, the role of social media in enhancing and publicizing our work as defenders is key. But how do we know that everything and anything we find online is the truth? How are we able to tell this is true, this is a rumor, and how do we remain safe online as we do our work? Karibu Wanjeri.
Thank you, Salome, and thanking the participants for still being with us. Well, this is the new normal. So in other circumstances, we would be together physically sharing. Social media is actually one of the most powerful advocacy tools we have in Kenya at the moment, and it has been so for quite a few years. It has come to a point where the government itself cannot ignore what we say online anymore. But most importantly, the government itself spends over 200 million, give or take, every single month to keep the information rolling and to keep all those people who attack us and give us information online. So if they're spending that much money in a month to just make sure their online spaces are active and their accounts are in use, they also believe that it is a powerful space. Now, as an activist who has no organization and who is not funded in any way to do what I'm doing, I find social media for me as a tool to bring out some of the issues that I want to bring out, because number one, it's relatively cheap. I don't need an office, I only need my handset. Number two, I reach as many people as possible in a very short time. So I administrate a group, and I'll give an example. I administrate a group called Buyer Beware Kenya on Facebook. It has over 160,000 members. That group is the one that ran the Support a HRD campaign. So I went to the group and I told them, we have human rights defenders out there who are in need of food. Can we bring together some resources and send them, some money, 1,000 bob each, give or take? And that entire amount of money that was raised for defenders at that time was collected only using social media. So social media is not only powerful, the people who we want to target make note of what it is that we are saying online. Another powerful and very powerful space is Twitter. That is why I was actually encouraging people earlier to use Twitter, and some of the things you pick from here, put them there, because we have a very huge following and a very huge reach if you put whatever it is you're putting on Twitter. And it also brings people into the conversation who are not able to join us in this webinar. Twitter is what government fears the most. I have seen some of the activists today. I've seen actually, Rachel, you've been quite active of late on online. I have seen Ruth Mumbi has also become very active online. You as an activist, whatever it is that you're doing, if you want to highlight issues, it is time now that we turn our accounts, not just for taking your photos and showing all the good times, turn your accounts into advocacy tools. That way, even if we do not have opportunities to go to the street and protest, you're expressing yourself still to other people out there, other than getting frustrated and keeping it within, you're using your social media to highlight some of the injustices that surround you. Now, we can't always tell what is online is true or not. Fact checking becomes a very difficult thing for most of us, even us who are experienced in using online spaces. But in most cases, very rarely, especially when we are reporting on injustices or talking about injustices or the theft of our resources and things like that, very rarely do we come up with some of this information out of the blue. It usually has some background to it. We usually do some homework on it. If you see me discussing, for instance, that Nairobi County has lost 12 billion in the last 2 years, it is because that is information that is in the Auditor General's report that I have taken time to read and able to put out there. Okay. Now, the beauty about social media is, compared to, for instance, mainstream media, is that in mainstream media, whatever you have to put out, whether in the newspaper or in their blog sites or news sites, it has to go through a process where people have to agree and, you come across blockades. But when you're using your own account, you become your own boss about the information that you put out there. As long as what you're putting out there has integrity behind it, it is not something that just moshene for the sake of moshene, if I can say that. But for me, I think activists now need to start moving more towards going online with their issues, coming together and surrounding an advocacy action. For instance, if it is Muycalli's program to raise money to buy food for people in Mathare. If several activists would say that, and you as an activist, the people who are online are also offline and they trust you. So your word is taken for it. And people, for instance, I keep telling people who try to start organizations and things like that to raise money for whatever reason, people give to people. People will not give out of the blue, and people will give to a cause that they believe in. If you yourself make yourself a brand and you ask people to support something, they will support because it is you who has asked them to do that. And you have that power in your hand when you turn your social media account from not just a personal thing, but also to an advocacy tool. Now, another thing social media allows us to do, for instance, is like host this meeting. What we have seen in the last few months, if we did not have something like Zoom, so as activists, we don't really have to meet physically. We have things like Zoom now, we have webinars, we have all sorts of things. You're still able to plan around action. You're still able to plan around whatever it is you want to do online. What you just need to know is how to protect yourself. Which are the spaces that are safe for you? Like now, this is a webinar, or whether it is Zoom, the people you are meeting, this was a public invitation. So we don't know everybody who is in this space, what their intentions are, and what it is that they are in this space for. So many of them could be HRDs, but that doesn't mean that there's not somebody out there who's here specifically to listen or mind whatever it is that we are saying. Now, we cannot protect ourselves when it is something this public, but as HRDs, the use of these tools can be able to help us advocate more for our issues when we use them and in a safe manner. I had my colleague earlier who was talking about the media say the issue of the cyberbullying act and things like that. We have seen that. We have been threatened with it. We saw Mike Sonko, for instance, spent 5 million shillings doing a documentary on us as administrators of the group Buyer Beware, because we are the reason why he had to leave office. The EACC asked us to go in for a meeting to say where we are removing the information that over 12 billion shillings has been stolen. Mainstream media has refused to report that information. It is in the Auditor General's report. That is a public document. It is our right to have that information. But mainstream media cannot be able to openly do that because most of them, their hands are tied editorially, or they're in the pockets of some of these politicians. So we took that report, put it on Buyer Beware. We brought it down because a lot of these reports are very heavy. We simplified it and just made it, guys, this is the amount of money we have lost since Sonko sat on that seat. So what did he do? He sent police after us. Personally, in my place, they came twice, but they could not access because at the gate you have to say where you're going, and they have to call us and to give permission for you to come in. But they went and picked Mildred Ati Owiso and tear gassed her twice from her house, and she was removed and taken to the police station, but no charges were preferred against her in both instances. And in this time, we are being threatened with issues of, oh, you're going to be taken to court for cyberbullying and misuse of communications device, which is unconstitutional. It was actually ruled unconstitutional by the courts some time back. We saw what happened to Mutemi Wakiama. Mutemi Wakiama was removed from his house like a petty thief. Why? Because he was talking about the true history of this country, which is Uhuru Kenyatta's father was not Mau Mau. He was not, but where did he get that information from? That information is actually fact. And you can find it in our national archives. So somebody went to the national archives, extracted the information, did a thread on it, then many people shared the thread. But because Mutemi Wakiama has a huge following, he became a target because he's the one who made it go viral. The person who posted it first only had about 40, 45 retweets. When Mutemi Wakiama brought it out, it was everywhere. So they went after him. So harassing us for using social media is something that we are seeing actually has happened more during this period. Even Ruth Mombi was using her social media, Facebook, to rally support for the Kariobangi victims. What did they do? They threatened her. She was summoned to the police. I don't know if she's being arrested. They sent her messages threatening her to stop championing for the rights of the people who'd been evicted in Kariobangi. What she did was very powerful, and all she did was use her social media account. And she was able to rally support and highlight the issues that were affecting the Kariobangi evictees. And these are things that now mainstream media now later comes and picks up. So mainstream media has a habit of coming into our social media accounts, onto our social media campaigns, and picking news from it. So if you want something to become news, put it on Buyer Beware or put it on Twitter or something, the mainstream media will pick it. And they are unable to ignore reporting on some issues when it has gone viral. So even the editors themselves are going to feel funny saying, no, you cannot report on that, when already it's out there in the public domain. So as activists, we need to rethink how we use our social media spaces for the work that we do. It is a very, very powerful space. The government is terrified of that space. You heard Kenyatta say that we bullied him until he fungered his accounts. He's online. He's using a pseudo account online, okay? But his official account had to be removed because we were going at him all the time. And it was affecting him as a person. You know, he's actually received therapy according to some sources because of how much hate he's receiving online. It is not hate, it is us telling him he's messing up. And it is our duty as activists to tell him he's messing up. So turn your accounts into tools. Okay, let them not just be for selfies and things like that. They also help us as individuals who do not have, like for instance, the coalition has done this report, right? They are able to put it out there in their websites and all that. And if they did not have that website, if they did not have, like now we are live on YouTube, if they did not have the resources to be able to do this, this report would have remained within themselves and in their office. So we can be able to turn whatever it is that we have. We don't need many resources. If you have money to be able to buy a bundle that can WhatsApp or can tweet or can Facebook, that's still there is better than doing nothing. So let's embrace online spaces more. Let's learn how to use them more while protecting yourselves. Make sure whatever it is you're putting out there is not only factual, it is something you can stand and say, yes, this is where I got it from. Okay, I think, have I covered it all, Salome?
Yes, you have, Asante. Asante sana, Wanjeri. And 3 things that Wanjeri has said to defend us: that social media is powerful, it is cheap, it is a tool for fundraising, and it is a tool that you can use for your own safety. But of importance, make yourself a brand using your own social media accounts. Asante sana, Wanjeri. I want to invite Kamau. And Kamau, I want you to respond to some of the questions that are being asked. Issues of attack of HRDs, CBOs, and organizations. And tell us what NCHRDK is hoping to achieve through this report, or how we plan to use their report. But of importance, rededicate the organization's commitment to the work of human rights defenders. Kamau, karibu. Mambo tatu kwako within the 5 minutes or so remaining before we wrap up.
Okay, thank you, Salome. And I want to thank all the panelists. They've covered quite the breadth and the width of the report and many other issues. Indeed, several issues have come up and some challenge posed to us in terms of what we need to do. Muycalli, thank you so much for echoing the fact that when we are contained in physical spaces, we still can expand in various spaces, platforms, particularly the social media, which indeed is really working hard very well. And I also have the challenge from Commissioner that we need to partner both with state and non-state actors. You've said particular humanitarian organizations will be very critical at this period, and also justice actors, organizations like Kenya National Commission of Human Rights, IPOA, I would add the DPP, and of course, even the Inspector General's office. And I think these are some of the spaces that we're trying to, we've really been engaging with them to make sure that there is respect for the work of defending human rights, which is clearly contained within Chapter 4 of our Constitution, is respected. And I know that Rachel have also raised very critical comments regarding not resilience, yes, but at the same time, caring about the well-being, your well-being as a human rights defender. And of course, I've heard from Wanjara Robert talking about the need to continue beyond recording. We need to go ahead and monitor even when states has made commitments in terms of acting on some of the cases. And I think these are something we need to follow up on. But specific to, and of course, the specific to challenge that has been posed to us in terms of what has been our response, how are we responding to human rights defenders the attack? I need to emphasize, my colleague Ishmael has mentioned, that we have partnered in the responding to, I think, 3 cases now where vocal human rights defenders advocating for LGBT rights have been forced to relocate from their spaces. And I think we've been there and supported them to move in spaces where they are safe. That commitment is also not just to individuals, but also to institutions. We work very hard in partnership with other organizations to ensure that when any human rights defender and the organizations under threat, we stand in solidarity. And I think the emphasis here is that in the implementation of human rights, in the advancement of human rights, non-discrimination is a critical principle, and so human rights defenders working on SOGI rights are equally as critical. And specifically to the attacks on the Hoimas office in Nyeri online, yes, we have received that information, and indeed I've actually liaised with Kenya National Commission of Human Rights on the same. I can assure you that we'll be responding on how best we need to work together to respond to those threats, because whenever one of us is under threat, it means all of us honestly are the next, and we are all threatened. So as a coalition, I can just want to assure you that the kind of resources that we have go towards the interventions for persons that are at risk because of defending human rights. And that cuts across anyone. You don't really have to be a member of the coalition. As long as you're defending human rights, we only need to do a verification process and to ensure that indeed you're a human rights defender defending rights, and your organization as well is not advocating for violence. But so we are able to work together. So be assured, those listening and also organizations that attack, that we are there for you and we'll do our best. And we work in partnership with others, including like, for example, PEMA there. We also work with GALC and others. So we'll be engaging with them in this particular case. But I'm also going to call on board other partners like the Kenya National Commission of Human Rights, and who we are going to also work with to ensure that the respective state agencies, I like the comment that we have to be careful that even when we do our work, we don't take away we have to insist that the government must take its responsibility, its duty to protect, to fulfill, are still their role, and we have to work on. So moving forward with this particular report, there are various recommendations that are being made, but more specifically, I've seen the request to share this information. We are going to share it. This document will be available online. And for those who have shared your email addresses, we are going to share that report directly to you. But please don't share your ID numbers. We do not need your ID numbers to share your report. But at the same time, we are going to unpack, as we have been advised by Wanjeri, so that we're able to share it in formats that more people can also access it in small bits and bits. Some of the keywords that have come in these meetings will be used for purposes of Twitter and other forums. So for me, this is an assurance that we'll continue supporting and working with humanized defenders. We'll continue supporting humanized defenders with skills enhancements to do their work much better. And I think one of the things is for those organizations that have not really adopted technology, please give us a call. I've shared our hotline number there. We have a colleague here who can help you set up such a webinar so that you can communicate even online, just like we've done. At the same time, the humanized defenders that require psychosocial support because of the challenges that their wellness that they face because of the wellness needs because they face because of these circumstances. Please, I've also shared that number, and at the same time our email address. Please get in touch with us and we'll be available for you. For now, I would say thank you, and please encouraging humanized defenders to keep doing what they are doing. You cannot be safe, you cannot have peace when injustices are happening around you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamau, for the parting shots.
Salome, can I say something? Maybe DK to say it. Maybe DK can talk about the Charities Award nomination since we are almost to the deadline.
Santi, DK, something on the award?
Thank you, Rachel, for that. And every year we celebrate the great work and the resilience of humanized defenders operating in very difficult environment. And awards are shared. I wish there's a way that people could say it's too far, but we do honor humanized defenders. And at this point, we are at that stage where we are encouraging nominations, people to nominate. Yourself, you can nominate yourself as a humanized defender who is doing great work. We need to showcase your work. You can nominate someone who is doing great work in difficult circumstances and have been very successful. We have 3 awards. We have what we call the Lifetime Humanized Defenders of the Year Award that is given to some of the seasoned humanized defender. We have an upcoming Humanized Defender of the Year Award that goes to new emerging humanized defenders that are using all manner of creativity to defend human rights. And we also have the Humanized Defender of the Year Award that goes to the most innovative, also seasoned humanized defenders that are doing great work. And we encourage more so to come from communities at the grassroots level. Those people that whenever you say you have a challenge, you say, look here, I think we can go to so-and-so who will help us in highlighting our concern for humanized issues. My colleagues will shortly, we will be sharing as we conclude the link on how you can fill that form. We shall be celebrating the Humanized Defender of the Year at the end of November this year, but we have 2 weeks towards the conclusion of receiving nominations. And please also, you can only nominate not just individuals, but also a group of humanized defenders, even in an organization that are working collectively towards achieving the goal of defending human rights. Thank you very much. And I'm glad that Rachel is raising that. One of the great has been a member of the judging panel because we have a team that received the nominations, but at the same time, we have an independent judging panel that will go through the nomination to be able to, at the end of the day, to come up with the overall winners. And the award comes with some financial some financial assistance for the organization or the individual to help advance human rights, $1,000. So that should also be an encouragement to most of the human rights defenders, because few people actually who defend human rights receive any form of remuneration. We are all doing it for free. We are all committed. It's free service, but we try to provide that basic support for people so that you can help them to move to support even wider area of defending human rights. Thank you.
Asante sana, Kamau. To wind up, let me share with you our plans for webinar in the coming weeks. We will be organizing 3 more webinars. We have a wellness webinar, and therefore for all those who are saying tumechoka, we are not sure, tuko na stress, kindly be on the lookout for the wellness webinar. In the next few weeks, we are going to organize a webinar for environmental activists. So if you're joining us, Hinzano from Lamu, among others, prepare yourself to join us for that webinar. And then we are going to, towards the end of August, we will be organizing a webinar for women human rights defenders. So those are the 3 that are lined up. I want to invite all of you every Tuesday, every Friday, 5 o'clock, between 5 and 6:30. We have our workout sessions, and these are open to defenders. They are online, so we will be sharing with you a link that can be used to join the workout sessions. And of importance, let us keep this discussion going. Let people know what it means for defenders to defend rights during a pandemic. So let's keep the conversations online active. To all our panelists, asante sana. 2 hours of your time during COVID time are very important, and we appreciate. We've learned a lot from you. And to all the defenders, wherever you've joined in, thank you, and let this conversation continue trending. Thank you and have a nice day, and let us keep watch for the upcoming webinars. Asante sana to our technical team behind the scenes, Ahmed, Diana, among others, asanteni. We did not have any hitch. Tuendelee na kazi nzuri pamoja.
Thank you, Salome, too, for
Thank you
moderating.
so much,
Asante sana.
Comrades.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
All right.